What is the cost of a legacy when greatness isn't just a standard, but a script? What happens to freedom of expression, to nuances and individuality? When we force a generation to live in the shadow, how do they bloom?
There's nothing wrong with celebrating heroes, with praising legends and immortalizing icons. But what do we lose when the next wave of stars is asked to conform instead of create? And maybe most importantly, how does that pressure warp them? We foster the culture, we create the narratives and cultivate the talking points. But as our words echo, they don't just fade, they carve a landscape. And it's time to ask, who does that environment serve? And who does it hinder? For decades now, the defining measurement of a superstar has been jewelry. Tiers of Hall of Famers were decided by the number of rings they had and the trophies they lifted. It made arguments simple, but those newly formed laws strangled the freedom of players, locking them into a race against the clock. Either find a way to win at any cost or be forever known as one of the guys that couldn't get it done. This wasn't inevitable. We didn't have to make sports singular or history binary, but we fell into a pattern. We repeated talking points that weren't ours, regurgitated beliefs we didn't recognize until the framework was cemented. It wasn't about what they overcame, what they fought through, or even what they accomplished, only about what they won, or more accurately, how many they won. We didn't always talk about the game this way, but when a player becomes bigger than the sport itself, the sport warps around him. The founder, Michael Jordan. The 80s were an exciting time in basketball. Magic Johnson brought glamour back to Hollywood. Larry Bird ignited Boston's fighting spirit, the league a fighting chance in the American sports landscape. The rivalry sparked interest, but the league needed one more. There were untapped markets, fans who didn't see the sport's magic. They needed a hero, not one part of a rivalry, but an undisputed protagonist. And right on cue, a lanky shooting guard from North Carolina stepped on stage. The real hoopheads already knew the name Michael Jordan. The high-flying super talent made a habit of effortlessly defying professional defenses. As a rookie, before a sophomore season, injury derailed his momentum.
Without the noise, Jordan faded into the background, a supporting character in the Bird vs. Magic drama. Then the playoffs arrived. The Bulls were awarded a first-round matchup against the defending Eastern Conference champions, the Boston Celtics. The series was a seamless 3-0 sweep, but in Game 2, something happened.
Chicago couldn't stop the Celtics, but the Celtics couldn't stop number 23. 63 points, littered with highlights that widened the range of possibility. This wasn't just talent, it was a vision, the imagination to theorize graceful innovations, and the skill to bring that theory to life. It didn't matter that he lost. He was supposed to lose. If he needed time, we'd give him time. He was a once-in-a-lifetime creator, bridging the gap between athletics and inspiration, realizing sport as performance art. It wasn't his show. We were just along for the ride. The calendar kept flipping, and as the years went by, Jordan grew. He elevated his individual game, expanded his repertoire, and then ran into a brick wall. The bad boy Pistons weren't interested in stories. They didn't care for heroes. They just wanted to win. For 2 years, they sent the Bulls home early and pulled the plug on the Air Jordan hype train. Jordan's ascension stalled. Just as the Celtics had faded, a new Eastern Conference foe stood in his way. No matter his brilliance, he couldn't slay this dragon. It wasn't a one-man job. He needed a team. Thankfully, Chicago wasn't keen on letting this comet pass by. A draft day trade landed Scottie Pippen. High-quality scouting led to Horace Grant. A coaching change put Phil Jackson on the sideline. The pieces were now in place. And finally, after 5 grueling years and 3 postseason failures, Michael Jordan had done it. He was a champion.
And not because of him alone, but because of the infrastructure that elevated him, the players that adapted around him, and the lessons he learned from his shortcomings. Jordan was always a muse, but in time he became a masterpiece, largely because of the time and room we gave him to evolve.
We didn't pull him in one direction. We never told him what he should be. We let the imperceivable ember light the way, only watching in amazement as it lit up the sky. Chicago never looked back. 6 titles, 2 three-peats, enough memories to define a culture. Jordan wasn't just a player. He was a symbol, a shape that told a story on sight. But in myth, truth fades. The common story was of a warrior who never lost, despite the fact that he did, and in doing so, he learned how to win. But that didn't matter. The world loves one thing above all else: a hero, a black and white good guy, a role model, a standard. And if the context gets in the way of that, then cut the context. The heretic, LeBron James. From the moment LeBron James put on an NBA jersey, the expectations were clear: meet or surpass the man who popularized the number on his back. By year 4, he was already ahead of schedule, already a scoring champion, a 3-time All-NBA selection, and a 2-time MVP finalist. It wasn't just individual success either. His brilliance had sparked an almost immediate franchise turnaround, and now, at only 22 years old, he led the Cavs through the East and earned a matchup with the San Antonio Spurs in the finals.
Unfortunately, it wasn't about appreciation or novelty this time. It was about imitation. The public was hooked. They wanted more of the jump man, more of that iron-willed competitor who stepped over Hall of Famers like they were roadblocks, more of the mirage and less of the reality.
LeBron kept pushing, dragging lackluster rosters to 60-win seasons and conference finals appearances, but each time some battle-tested Eastern Conference foe rose to the challenge and sent the Cavs back to Cleveland. First, it was the Celtics, a collection of 3 future first-ballot Hall of Famers who were brought together to raise banner number 17. With Zydrunas Ilgauskas and Delonte West as his co-stars, James pushed Boston to the brink, falling in a tightly contested Game 7 in spite of a 45-point performance. The next year, with the addition of Mo Williams in the backcourt and Mike Brown on the sideline, the King donned his crown, leading Cleveland to a 66-win season, taking home his first MVP award and sweeping the Pistons in the first round and then the Hawks in the second. This looked like the year. Sure, the roster wasn't overwhelming, but he had another all-star beside him now and a new coach holding the clipboard. That was all Jordan needed, right? Unfortunately, the scales weren't balanced here. The Magic had Dwight Howard and a bullpen full of shooters ready to stretch the floor and give their big man one-on-one opportunities on the glass. It was a hard-fought 6-game series, but the glory went to Orlando. Time was ticking, and the critics were getting louder. Maybe he didn't want it enough. Maybe he wasn't cutthroat enough. And maybe he didn't have what it took to be like Mike. The pressure was suffocating. Jordan never had to chase a ghost. He just had to be himself. He didn't nitpick the pace or demand an acceleration. It wasn't about the trophies or the banners, just the journey.
Unfortunately, LeBron had a quota: win 6, at least 6, or just be another guy who couldn't measure up. Everyone knew that next year would be a breaking point.
The regular season was just another overwhelming success. 60 wins, a second consecutive MVP, just par for the course. Then came the playoffs. First, a brief pit stop in Chicago, a quick 5-game dismissal of the Bulls. Then in round 2, another matchup with the Celtics. Boston had a clear game plan: make someone else, anyone else, beat them. That meant doubling LeBron, constantly disrupting his rhythm, and putting him on the floor whenever necessary. Some games it slowed him down, some games it didn't. But one guy, no matter how spectacular, wouldn't be enough to defeat this Celtics squad. They took Cleveland down in 6 games. The frustration had bubbled over. The botched free agent acquisitions, the draft misses, the inability to add talent. He wasn't naive. He heard the noise. He knew that he needed some jewelry, and he also knew he wouldn't be getting any with the Cavs, at least not these Cavs. Now the greats of the game were defined by the number of times they stood on the mountaintop, so he found an expedition that could take him there. The decision sent shockwaves through the basketball world.
Everywhere you looked, LeBron was being called a fraud or being slammed as a competitor. It didn't matter that Miami's roster wasn't that much better than Chicago's, or that LeBron only made the move to meet the expectations we placed on him, to win the game according to the rules we wrote.
It didn't even matter that he pulled it off and went to 4 consecutive finals and won 2. It wasn't the result, it was the act that was the sin. He did something that Jordan didn't. He spoiled the hero's journey and broke our narrative, and for that, he had to be chastised, whether it was reasonable or not. The martyr, Kevin Durant. There aren't many guys who love the game the way Kevin Durant does. You see it in his interviews, in his painstakingly perfect form, in his demeanor. He loves it for what it is and what it could mean. If there's basketball to watch, he's watching it. If there's a ball in a court, he's shooting, just like any other kid from the DMV. For someone like this, legacy would always be important. He knew he was special, but plenty of special players had been forgotten. To be immortalized, to stand on a pedestal and direct the light onto your path, you had to win championships. And after LeBron's dynasty in Miami, you had to do it by any means necessary. At first, that goal seemed entirely possible in Oklahoma City. Like LeBron, the Slim Reaper punched his ticket to his first finals at 22. But unlike the kid from Akron, DC's finest had a core of young stars to grow alongside. Russell Westbrook, the electric floor general igniting the crowd, Serge Ibaka, the premier shot blocker with a knockdown jumper, and James James Harden, the best sixth man in the league, a silky smooth creator capable of dropping 30 points or 10 assists on any given night. Yeah, they lost to Miami, but they'd be fine. And then the trade happened. Scared of the luxury tax, OKC shipped Harden to Houston for picks and prospects. Some panned out, but none came close to replacing the beard. While it felt like a bad move at the time, it turned out to be a runaway robbery by the Rockets. Fine, the games go on. They still had one of the league's best young cores and its very best scorer. Harden was amazing, but he was a luxury, not a necessity. The next year, they won 60 games and entered the playoffs as a real title contender, but a first-round injury to Westbrook ended their season early. The next season, Durant hit another level, 32 points per game, his first MVP, yet another near 60-win season, and then another postseason injury. Ibaka missed the first 2 games of the conference finals. The Spurs capitalized, jumping to a 2-0 lead. Clawing back from a 2-0 deficit in the conference finals is daunting, no matter the opponent. But against the 2014 Spurs, that'd take 3 wishes from a genie and some luck. Fine, run it back. And then the rug got pulled. A slew of injuries to Durant, Westbrook, and Ibaka ended their season before it started. 2016 was different. They weren't the young guys anymore. A new challenger had cut in line, a pair of frightening sharpshooters in the Bay, stepping over the basketball logic of old.
It was now or never. No more waiting. No more next year. If KD wanted to stand alongside Jordan, to be revered as the game's greatest, he had to start winning rings. And if it didn't happen in 2016, something needed to change.
They got through the regular season unscathed, 55 wins and an easy first-round matchup against the aging Mavericks. The second round was a classic, the latest chapter in their rivalry with the Spurs. Westbrook played with the intensity of a rabid dog. Durant played with the polish of a trained killer. 4-2 OKC. They did it again. Now onto the team that stole their spotlight, the 73-9 Golden State Warriors. After splitting the first 2 games, the Thunder demolished the Dubs in back-to-back games, a commanding 3-1 lead. They stumbled into Oracle in Game 5, but Game 6 was back home. 1 win away. And then Clay went nuclear. 11 threes. OKC contested, denied, took away his airspace. Nothing mattered. Klay Thompson was walking on water. Game 7, the Thunder looked tense, uncomfortable. They had their chance, but they didn't do enough. It was over. Another opportunity squandered. This time, no excuses. The public's hourglass was empty. The finals came and went. The Warriors suffered the same fate they enjoyed a round before. And then Draymond called Kevin Durant in the parking lot. He had a decision of his own to make. Risk it all for the flawed franchise that raised him, or go where he knew he could get it done. So he made his choice. He played to win the game, and we tore him up. It's okay to disagree with the decision. It's okay to feel dejected or deflated, but this went too far. We screamed he wasn't competitive. We called him the weakest superstar of all time, a traitor, a villain, the man who ruined basketball. The game that meant the world to him, and the game that he had just hoped to contribute to, rejected him, and verbally accosted him on any social media platform they could find. He shrugged it off. He won 2 rings, 2 finals MVPs, made a real case as the best player in the world, but none of that mattered.
Sure, he won, but he won wrong. He didn't win like Jordan. He didn't wait for a franchise to build around him. Only he did. He gave everything he had to OKC. He authored their record books, turned them into a small market powerhouse. It just wasn't enough.
We told him he needed to win rings. We shouted it back at every accomplishment, so he listened to us, and then we screamed again. It was a damn shame the game never treated him the way he treated it. We've always wanted the greats to be great. We always have, we always will. It's our job to demand it and to water it when it sprouts. But we can only do that when we recognize it. That means recognizing the fickle fate of sports, admitting that winners lose, they just get back up, and accepting that journey varies. No one path is the same, and no one player is identical. Sometimes they're imported from Serbia and grow up asking for 3-on-3 games on Facebook. Other times they grow up on NBA sidelines and learn the game up close. There's no right way to do it, and there's no easy way to get there. Only one unifying characteristic. They've got to love the game, to pour more into it than most people put into anything, and approach it with the same respect as a Baptist shows the Bible. They have to give it everything they have. The least we could do is let them breathe, to stop disparaging them from not fitting into boxes we made for them, and let them show us something special. Let them share the gift they've nurtured.
Heroes are for fairy tales, and we're here for the stories, for the trials and tribulations, the ebbs and the flows, the wins and the losses. We're here to appreciate greatness, not define it.